The Spoken Token is a proud member of the Pod Studio One podcast network.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome into a very special solo on the table. And this will be our first solo on the table, or a solo flight, as you call it. For those of you who have been listening to us and been with us here for a while, you know that on the table is what we do instead of, say, a numbered review. We never wanted to get into numbered reviews. And on the table is just our experience with a title. Alex and I like to play the games, and then we'll sit down and talk about at length with some bit of a form factor to it of how we feel, how the game made us feel, and what we experienced or encountered when we play the game. So to that end, this will be patterned after our regular on the table with a few changes, of course, because it is about a solo game. And this may change moving forward as we interact with you and as we put these out there. Please feel free to give us feedback and let us know what you would like to hear us dive into that may be separate, or as we run into separate things that may be different from talking about strictly a multiplayer version of the game. But just to refresh everyone, these are the points that we like to make sure we hit, and then they tend to encompass all of our thoughts and help us get pointed in the right direction. So those will be rules, and this will cover everything in the rule book from setup to actually communicating to you what you need to do while you're playing. And then we talk components, which of course this covers every piece in the box, and it can also cover the table presence. What does it look like when it's all laid out? Then we talk, of course, play. How does the game play? Is it smooth? What are the fun interactions? What does it encourage? How do we feel while it was being played? Finally, or should I say what, does the title do with its chosen theme? How does it use it to further the narrative of the game and provide atmosphere for those playing? This particular one may be a bit more impactful during a solo game because, of course, a lot of what's going on is going to be in the theater of the mind or in your own headspace. Hopefully you're sitting down to enjoy certainly what's on the table before you, but it can be completely enhanced at your own pace, at your own times, with your own terminology, as you go along and as you play solo. One of the benefits of playing a solo game. So having said that, let's get into it. And of course, this time, this is Motor City, which is published by 25th Century Games. This is designed by Adam Hill, Matt Riddle, and Ben Pinchback, with art by Ilya Avakov and Marais Barens. And please forgive me if I mispronounced your name. This particular game was originally released to crowdfunding in 2022. So my very first impressions with this game were on Kickstarter. I was finishing up another campaign, and I was actually going through and being a little bit excited about how good I have been to not back anything new for a while. And then this one came into my feed. It was close at the time. I think it was maybe a day or two. It may have been inside of a day of finishing, but it was also very, very affordable. And also cars. I absolutely adore cars. So with the promise of the format, and then of course it's a roll and write, with all of this fresh in my mind, I looked it over in my usual fashion. So I do some more things. I'll look up the company, look at their other projects, think about what it says in its video and about what it says in the rules and all of those good things about how it will play, and compare what I personally like about those genres, not specifically games, but what I like about those genres. I did all of my due diligence, my own personal little form, and then I pulled the trigger. It was heady. It was a heady feeling. And it was extremely familiar, I think, probably to a lot of people. But when you crowdfund, when you're going to previously unknown entities, okay, I get it. There's a bit of excitement with that. One of the reasons why it caught on so much, one of the reasons I think why it has endured, and I don't want to get off onto a tangent on that, but it's such a cool feeling when you're thinking, man, this is something that I've not heard of before. It seems new. This is a neat idea, and I can't wait to get it. I did pretty much as quickly as that feeling rose up. I put it back in my pocket and I went on about my business. Fast forwarding to a couple of days, it was a mail day, an unannounced mail day. Those are the best kind when they include games. Some months later, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised by a very blue, quite attractive package staring back up at me. Literally, when I opened the box, I had no idea. I hadn't received any mail yet. So I didn't know that it was coming. No tracking information. It just shows up. And of course, this was met with the whole usual of, oh yeah, I did back that. And then of course, immediately we're going to get it and take a look at it at the table. So now I'm going to walk you through a bit of my process with these particular situations. Specifically speaking of unannounced crowdfunding games showing up on the front door unannounced in packaging, and you're completely left bewildered and confused. So after I open the box and realize that that's what it is, I do look at the exterior. It is the only time for me that aesthetics will make any bit of a difference. Okay. And I do this specifically for one reason, and it is just the way my mind works. Okay. So I'm looking for, is it good looking to me? Does it attract me? And particularly for Motor City, check. And then how it feels, how heavy is it? The heft of it. This is a pleasantly sized, smaller box. It's not tiny, but it's not gigantic, but it's very sturdy and it's pretty heavy. Okay, so those are good things when you're talking about a board game. There's a lot of goodness inside the box. I then take some pictures. Well, sometimes. I don't always take pictures, but sometimes I like to get pictures. And then I open the shrink. That's right. I do all of that before I even open the shrink. After the shrink is opened, you have to take a good, deep, lung-full smell of that wonderful new game, board game smell. And then I will dive down through it. I'll take a quick but fairly thorough look down through the box and its components. I don't stop and spend a whole lot of time on these typically because of necessity, and I'll talk about that in a second. Because here, basically, a game can grab me, right? What I'm trying to do here is just get that initial familiarity with the game. I just realized I remembered, okay, this is a game that I backed. I had clearly forgotten about it. I didn't get a warning to know that it was coming. So it's a little bit, like I said, unannounced. So I'm just, getting familiar to remember, hey, this is why I actually backed this game. This is the promise that page showed me. This is the promise that the publishers were dealing out. So let's see how they deliver. This is my process for how I kind of get a little quick glimpse of that. I'm going to dig deeper into that, obviously, when I play the game. But this is my first chance to get that first impression all over again. And so I do that. And I will say this, that, like I said, a game can grab me here, but I love board games. And the more exposure that I can get to them, the better. And also, times like this, particularly like this one, when they come in, I'm usually doing other things. So by their nature, this is an interruption, but I do give them the fair chance to grab me out of whatever that other thing is that I'm doing, just long enough to dive down through the box like I just said. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they totally captivate me and they go even a little bit further, which is very pleasantly surprised. I don't expect any game to do that because if I'm doing something, typically life, right, whether I've got family over or I'm working, it's at lunch or I'm on my way out of the door, if I can stop and open the box and go through this process, because sometimes I can't always, something else is going on, I have to keep moving. But if I can stop and do this, I don't expect that they're going to hold me. I'm going to get back to what I was doing. I mean, that's just the decision that's been made. I'll be able to come back to the game later. I never count this as a negative against the game. I never later go back at any point in time, whether I'm discussing the game with Alex or even thinking about it, to write my thoughts down myself, think, well, that game didn't pull me out that first time, because again, that's the nature of it, right? It's not going to, it wasn't going to. Again, just sharing a bit with you about my own personal process. This is my process, and it just gives me a quick assessment of the components and the production of the game. This is going to be my first time handling it after all. So the impressions do linger and they do give me some information. I can think about it later when I play it later that, hey, okay, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember those jumped out to me the first time. Or I remember thinking that was a little odd the very first time. So these things are valuable and they are important. And that's my early process. With my first impressions out of the way, let's dig into the meat of everything, shall we? So we'll start off with rules. And of course, again, the rules cover everything in the rule book, from setup to actually communicating what you do when you play. So on first reading of the rules, I'll be honest, it left me feeling like I was missing something. I was falsely confident that I knew how the game worked. It turned out that I was right about that one. However, it is chalked up to my own special quirks and comprehension. I will never fault an outside source for my own personal comprehension, okay? Once moving the parts around and looking at the game moving, I was better able to understand what was going on with the system. Setup is clearly laid out and helps a great deal in these situations. This is a roll and write, so admittedly there is not much to do, but it is covered anyway. I like it when no liberties are taken and the publisher gives us everything we need to play the game in their rule book, so no assumptions that we know certain things and maybe we don't. There was no need to look up anything online or search for a playthrough. I am happy to report that. That was pretty cool. Some negatives are there were some liberties taken within the setup and start the game section, which is well done otherwise. The directions state to select some starting resources, yet it is not perfectly clear how to do this in that state. For those who have played roll and writes before, it may make more sense. Once you have some of these types of experiences under your belt, it will go smoother for you. But for new players to the genre, in my opinion, this is a part of the learning curve that publishers and designers and rulebook writers could help to smooth over just a bit. I came to this game from a cold first reading, and if I'm left confused, I chalk that up to my own personal learning style. I'll get the pieces out and I'll start moving them around. If then I still have issues getting to the point, then I note that this could be clearer. Okay, I'm going to stick with it until I do get it, and then I can do a post-mortem on where the disconnect was for me. I do this every time I play a new game. I understand that everyone does, but that's just my process. And yes, it was my process before the podcast. It'll be my process after the podcast too. Whether I'm preparing some written comments or not, literally, that's just how I do it. With this particular game, it took me more than one time to follow the stated setup. Relying on my previous time with roll and writes helped me in the end, but not everyone who will pick this up will have that time, or someone who already knows how to play to clear it up. Another issue of this type was with the score sheet, specifically the test track. On this track, when you perform an action, it is stated in the rulebook to proceed clockwise around the chosen track. This is very clear and concise. However, the arrows on the score sheets themselves seem to indicate a counterclockwise movement on two of the tracks and then clockwise on one of them. And the arrows that I mean here are the arrows that are pointing to, there's the name of the track, and then there's a little arrow that points to, this is that track. This is this track, this is that track. But just looking at it, those arrows, which are very clear to see, seem to indicate a counterclockwise movement on the tracks at first glance. Sure, read the manual. But again, this is just, a couple of little things. I just want to give you my experience with reading the rule book and then interacting with the components. And to be honest, this just more appears to be a function of the graphic design, but it is significant enough to the gameplay that if you miss it, it would completely change your outcome and your experience, and it could hamper your experience with the game. The package actually also curiously omits a detailed breakdown of what the spaces are on the score sheets, which I looked, if it's possible that I missed it. And again, remember, this is a first ed Kickstarter, first shipment out, so I'm sure that's one of the things they'll update. But again, I can only talk about what it is that I had in my hands. With a game where this is the meat of the design, though, to me, it seems to me that this was an oversight to not give as much information as possible about the main components, which would be the score sheets. The best example I can think of, I'll say the game mentions the action space on the score sheets as a place for you to put your chosen die, but it never points out with the materials in the box what that space is. Nope. It does not. Now, yes, the space is watermarked with a die on the sheet, but as it is, it's so faint and it blends in so well with the background and it leaves room to be missed that this is what the space is for. These are disclosed, I'm telling you about these things, due to how they can affect the gameplay experience. Also, of importance here is the fact that when looked at in the level of detail that this format, meaning a roll and write, puts forth, all games can come up the same. As in, the independent feel of each editor and each publisher has to be taken into account. I bring them up here because it bears saying precisely because it's not obvious. And in an effort to display what I'm identifying as an area I would like to see improvement upon. Having said all that, it is also important in the spirit of sharing with you my full experience so that you can make up your mind with research, not because I think you should feel one way or another. Components. This covers every piece in the box. This can also cover table presence, what it looks like when it's all laid out. As stated earlier, this one is solid. I like the neat and almost engineering approach they took with the artwork. All the lines are crisp and everything looks as if it were designed to be used to build something else. The iconography is distinct and is almost a little too minimal, but again, it works. Kind of a sort of shorthand for engineers, I kind of imagine it. And it works well. It works well right here. It looks like something that would be in the industry. The color palette is heavily blue on the box itself, and this is repeated throughout the inside of the box where it can be. There are complementary shades of blue and tan throughout the design, and it has a palette for me that showcases the thought went into the presentation, which I really appreciate. The cardboard itself is pleasantly thick, and it's not overly fussy. The finish on the paper products is also nice. There is one small folding board, and there's one solid piece that doesn't fold. Both of those parts are good quality. The graphic design and the colors look reminiscent of blueprints, and this is a nice touch that was well executed and lends to the theme as well as being functional to playing the game. The main player pads are extremely crisp and clean in their printing. And again, while they are a bit busier on the graphic design front than other components in the game, the color palette appears to be chosen with a purpose in mind. I cannot stress enough how excellent the production was of these games, because they made sure that these lines were crisp. They could have easily gone with a process that maybe didn't print as high of a resolution, and it would have been a bit of a mess, but they did not do that here, which is extremely well appreciated. The pads also are double-sided, which can elongate the replayability there in the box. They're pretty good paper stock as well. It's not too flimsy, but it's not so thick as it seems like it's overkill. There is a good number of both pads you will need for a standard game in the box, and this is a very welcome addition. With gray and white and black, speaking of the dice, as the main choices for the areas to place the dice, things were kept safe as far as colors go, but it does work very well in practice. This is one area in the rules explanation where things can get a little confusing when you first look at them. But in practice, the hues are different enough on the dies themselves that there's no confusion, and it really shouldn't happen. They are pretty distinct once you're looking at the actual boards. There are some wood components in the box also. They bring up the level of the components, but they aren't make it or break it in the implementation. The little cups of coffee and the vaguely muscle car era shaped first player token are really cool to have, particularly the little cups of coffee. You gotta love that. They are painted, but there is no silk screening, which again is not necessary. And there aren't any stickers in the box to put on them. So for me, this means they're not offensive, and they serve their purpose very well. They're over-engineered for what they're designed to do, in a very nice touch and a very welcome touch to kind of premium up the feel. The two included expansions rules, the solo reference sheet and the game's main reference sheet are all printed on single sheets of paper. And while it is a good quality color paper, and it basically matches the quality of the rulebook itself, I would have preferred that something like this be on cardstock if you're going to leave it out of the rulebook, or included in the book. I think the best option would have been included into the book. And I know a lot of times with productions from crowdfunding, it may not have been possible. Those modules may have been completed when it was too late to go back in and redesign the book. It is a process, and I don't want to get too far into this, but I do understand the process because I've worked and seen the process. When you have things graphically designed and you have things all laid out, it is not as simple as just adding pages into it. Sometimes it makes more sense economically and for production wise. So the timeline of a product like this, to just print them as separate sheets of paper. Adding them into the book throws off the page count, makes it maybe a different product. Your paper may not now be available. That printing could push it off, and now your current provider may say, hey, listen, we can't do a book that size. That's over the limit. Hey, we can subcontract it out. So many things can come in behind the scenes. And I know at the end of the day, the game players don't care about that, but those are some of the reasons why decisions like this are made. So at least I am very glad that they use, again, a good quality stock. It is printed on the same paper that's in the book. And again, just understand that those sheets are out there in the box. If you've got a Kickstarter edition, they're not errata. You're going to need them for those expansions and for some of the solo rules, the reference card. And of course, you can always laminate them or bling them up yourself later on down the road. Gameplay. So this, of course, how does the game play? Is it smooth? What are the fun interactions, and what does it encourage? For me, gameplay is robust. Just quickly, in a nutshell, the TLDR. I think the gameplay is very robust. This game is looking to accomplish a lot with this design paradigm, meaning roll and write. And at times it feels as if the form factor was an inspiration for the action on the table and not a consequence of it. Which in and of itself is one of the highest praises I can give to a small or an otherwise non-traditional form factor board game. I could go on a little bit more here about the state of design today from my perspective, and just how wonderful it is to experiment with the different types of hobby level board game experiences as it pertains, of course, to roll and writes. I won't, but I could. Anyway, having said that, Motor City invokes the fairly straightforward and pretty much most certainly very technical engineering world of designing, testing, building, and selling automobiles, as I believe it has come to evolve in our uniquely American market. It's not a slight to the rest of the world, but I do not have the frame of reference to compare or contrast the market in other nations. Billed as a strategic engine-building roll-and-write game on its own cover, the design here does not disappoint. You're going to start by building out the play area, setting up the board as needed for your player count. Each player gets a sizable duo of play sheets, and we're going to talk about those a little bit later. And then you're up and running. So to break it down, the game is played over 8 rounds, and each round has 3 main phases. And those phases would be the planning phase, the industry phase, and the audit phase. So I want to take a look at each of them briefly in order. So for the planning phase, here is where the active player gets to roll the dice. You're going to sort them by color and rolled symbols, placing the matches on their respective spaces on the blueprint table. Then the industry phase. This is where you're going to get to choose the dice from the blueprint table in player order. Choosing a die gives you access to 3 actions that can be taken in order. You're going to collect any bonus on the space with your chosen die. Next, you will choose either the blueprint action, which is at the top of the column your chosen die came from, or you're going to upgrade the action of your chosen die. One of the symbols, which is a cross with a dot in each quadrant, allows you to upgrade any of the 4 actions, not just that one. Or you can do research, which is simply filling in the next space on the research track. Finally, you get to perform a score sheet action by placing your chosen die in an unoccupied space provided on your score sheet and taking that associated action. These actions include testing, sales, production, and engineering. Effectively, this is where you're going to move up by marking the next space on the associated track and taking any combo moves that you unlock or gaining any resources that you unlock. Here, each player is going to choose 2 dice, and there's going to be 1 left based on the number of your setup. Everyone then gets to use that last die by taking its associated action or research. This one, sadly, you can't upgrade or collect the bonus space that it's located on. And in my games, that felt very balanced. That seemed like a very cool choice. And also, too, that flow feels good in the solo game. Again, I have not played it with other people yet live, but I think that's really cool to give everybody another shot each round to interact with the game and to work on your plan beyond the 2 actions that you take, which is pretty cool. That is the industry phase. Then finally, the audit phase. The audit phase happens. Each player scores victory points equal to the highest space marked on the speedometer, which is a section on one of your score sheets. Moving through the score sheets, moving through the other phases of doing research and testing and those things lets you move up on that track, or you can take an action to move up on the speedometer track, which of course is just simply marking off the next box. What this means, which I think is really cool, is that raising this number early is going to lead to better returns, because this is an action you can take it obviously in later phases of the game, but each turn in the audit phase you get those points. So if you get up past the 3 space in the first turn, the next turn you're going to at least get those 3 points again when you hit the audit phase. So you want to balance what you're doing with an eye on hitting the speedo, obviously to rev it up so that you can get more points. So the process repeats. That particular process repeats for the 8 rounds. And then, of course, you count your final points, and the winner is the person with the most points. The meat, of course, is going to be in the details. At its heart, Motor City is a roll and write, where you're choosing boxes to move up on several tracks on your score sheets to score points and or make combos, which again, roll and write. The action of building an efficient operation perfectly mimics, in my opinion, how this type of business needs to be run. It is smooth in its implementation, and once you get the hang of the game world's specific rules, you will be able to move fairly quickly with your presented actions. That's right, you won't always get the one you want, but the ones that are presented with you will always give you something interesting and fun to do. I love the feel of that. I do. The weight and the meat of the game are also, I think, pleasingly high. They're pretty decent levels. The score sheets are the backbone of this experience, and I am so glad that the designers, developers, and the publishers realize that. There are going to be 2 sheets per player, like we said earlier, with all of the departments that you need to design, build, and test and sell cars, as well as track your scoring of your points, of course, throughout the game. The sheets by design and by necessity are busy, but they have to be. But it is a control busy, and I think they're well designed once you know the game's rules. Also, just to be honest, they're very interesting to look at. There's the different test track layouts and all of the chosen colors. I think the color palette format that they chose for this, I think is very well done, because overall it presents a very pleasing picture, and it doesn't, to me anyway, it doesn't throw you off immediately. So now you can kind of sort of dig into it upon that second inspection and then see what it is that you're dealing with, which I think is really, really cool. There's the tried and true roll and write formula works very well here, as it does on any game of the genre, which is mark a box, follow the combos. There is a lot of information being wrangled in such a compact space. And honestly, whether or not this was on purpose, this solution to an engineering problem is so meta, and it is really well done. So my advice to you, do not turn off at the sight of these sheets. If they make you uncomfortable just looking at them, I understand that, but look at enlarging your own comfort zone and then do engage with them. You will not be disappointed. Predictably, comboing in the game is really fun. Raising your stats to give yourself the edge in other areas, just like you planned it, is amazing. I thought it was fantastic. There are enough meaningful other actions to actually work as mitigation to the die rolls, but then there is also pure dice mitigation built into the system as well, like any good roll and write should have. Simply interacting with the score sheets, for me, I think it's joy. It's simple, it's straightforward, and it's very memorable. You'll remember your time going up those tracks once you realize which things do what, where the combos are in terms of how you want to play a particular session. And that's a recipe for a game that you're going to go back to and pull off the shelf again. The solo changes are in the form of Auditor Emma. Love the name. Name is fantastic. She's going to alternate turns with you in the industry phase, meaning she's going to take a die. You take a die, she takes a die. When she takes a die, she crosses things off of your sheet. Okay, so the actions that she would take if it was another true player, she's crossing things off of your sheet. There is some bookkeeping as to what she will choose and when and why, but it is clear in the solo rules. And of course, you can have all of your references out. It's an open book test, so you can have all of the references out, and it does make sense. I didn't look at any of those reasons as to why she pulls anything and thinking, oh man, that's just contrived. Oh, okay, this didn't work. It seemed to fit. It worked with the theme and it rolled in. What this does, though, is that it has the effect of making you think and adapting to your changing internal pressures as you deal with the actions that you are unable to take. So again, remember I talked earlier about theater of the mind. So now this is your company. So now it's not a competitor across town who's building cars. Now this is pressure from within that you're having to deal with. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. You will get to some things quicker because boxes are going to be, crossed off. And of course, you may lose out on some things that would have been just right if you had taken them. For me, I think, which is really cool and was unexpected, I didn't get this from reading it, but it's the way it played out for me. There's a bit of a push your luck here that enters in as you work basically just to get actions prior to losing them, or which inevitably with dice rolling games, something comes up. So now you got to pivot to another action, right? And this action has presented itself and you're thinking, wow, do I take this action because the one I've been working towards, I can take with the next one. If Auditor Emma grabs that die next time, I'm going to lose it. So there's that push and pull, which I think is fantastic. And again, for the solo experience, it was a very, very welcome element for me personally, sitting it down at my table. Do you gamble that she's going to leave you that space for another turn? Or do you go on and take it and maybe hopefully another opportunity will come up later on? It was a very enjoyable bit of an internal gameplay for me. Moving on to theme. So what does a title do with a theme? How does it use it to further the narrative of the game and provide atmosphere for those playing? This one, I think, predictably, is a bit of a challenge. But it's one that most board game themes will lend to their respective project. So however you want to theme a board game, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. And that's part of the design puzzle and part of why I have so much respect for designers, developers, and publishers. Because, again, this is something that just exists. You're theming real world wonderful things and items to a board game. So that's par for the course. The art choices and the graphic design here do help. Okay. The blueprint background and the technical appearance drawing that's used all over the production and the pieces and the parts that you're going to use with perfectly crisp and straight lines and great proportions. All of this stuff lends an air of automotive production facility of, engineering. You're doing the engineering. It's this, we're designing them here, we're testing them there, we're building them over there. Those things, the tolerances are tight. Everyone is aware of automobiles and the tolerances are tight. So your lines have to be straight. You have to be precise. This game mimics that in the overall direction with the theme, and I think it's fantastic. Going about your choices deliberately and in order during the gameplay while of course a necessary reality, we are playing a board game after all. It's still helpful to the experience. It's very helpful, putting you in the mindset. This was deliberate. This was specific. Again, engineering. I love it. It's structured. It's ordered. It's almost careful feeling at times. And for me, it invokes that mindset, which is a wonderful clue into the overall theme of the game. Iteration is a big theme with this game as well. Through production, research, testing, and sales. Again, it's a roll and write. So iteration, you're going back to the resource track. You're going back, to each of these individual tracks, to production, to research, to testing, to sales. That's iteration. That's iteration. That's engineering. You build it, you test it, it doesn't work. You learn from it, you fix it up, you build it again, you redesign it. And I love that. I love that all of these things are kind of folding back in on it with the theme to help put you in a mindset. The art choices, from the pads to the boards, even the dice, is concise. And again, all of it is evocative of an engineering environment. The choices of a roll and write mechanic for the main mechanism of the game is a very interesting one here. And for me, that dictates that you take a chance with your input, then you work to optimize your output received. It's a roll and write, right? So you're rolling the dice, you know what those results are. Then you take a chance to pick the one that you pick, but then you need to be optimizing the output, where do you put that one that you picked? Where do you put that production die? Where do you put that sales die? I think that's fantastic. It's not quite exactly the way I envision real cards are designed, but it's certainly doesn't pull me out of the immersion. It helps the immersion and the suspension of disbelief. And I enjoy sessions of this one overall. So I'm going to give it thumbs up for the theme as well. I think it's very well done. That was my personal experience with it. Overall, I do have more plays of this game coming in my future. I'm going to play this one. It's going to go in my carry bag to work now that I'm back working in a different environment, and I'll get an opportunity, I hope, to pull it out at lunch and maybe get some more solos in, and maybe, who knows, and draw somebody in to play one with me if I can get it, once I get it down well enough to teach quick enough, in the lunch hour to both teach it and then play it with new peoples. Like meeples, peoples and meeples. It entered into my collection and it got itself on my radar for all the right reasons. It's interesting, accessible, and it was affordable. Those are all very good things. Then when it arrived, having a pure solo mode absolutely helped, of course. I'm going to revisit my ideas on this one as I dig deeper into the solo play, and of course, as I get it to the table in multiplayer as well. So with that, I think this is a very enjoyable experience that I think can appeal to both fans of roll and writes and fans of card culture, which is really cool. If you happen to be both, then absolutely do not delay and get yourself a look and sit down across or with Motor City by 25th Century Games as soon as you can. So, for The Spoken Token, I'm Larry Neal.
This has been the Spoken Token Podcast. If you'd like to interact with us, please contact us through email at thespokentokenpodcast@gmail.com, on Instagram at The Spoken Token Podcast, on Twitter at The Spoken Token, or on Facebook at The Spoken Token Podcast. And you can reach us through our BGG Guild number 2656.
You are listening to a Pod Studio One Podcast Network podcast. Find more great podcasts at www.podstudio1.com.